From a river that vanished in a single night, to a glowing hand writing a death sentence on a palace wall, to the most powerful city on earth, conquered without a single battle. This is the fall of Babylon explained. A conquest so quiet, so surgical, that the king of Babylon was still partying while enemy soldiers were already walking through his streets. He never noticed. By the time he did, it was the last night of his life. But let's rewind. 'Cause to understand how impossible this was, you gotta understand what Babylon was in 539 BC. This wasn't just a city. This was the city. The biggest urban center on the planet. Maybe 200,000 people, at a time when most of humanity had never seen a settlement bigger than a village. It sat on the Euphrates River, which ran straight through the middle of it like a liquid highway. It had the Ishtar Gate, a monster of glazed blue brick covered in golden dragons and bulls, so gorgeous that ancient writers ran out of adjectives. It had Itamananki, a ziggurat so tall it probably inspired the story of the Tower of Babel. And the walls. Oh man, the walls! Ancient sources describe a double ring of fortifications, so thick you could race chariots on top of them. Herodotus, the Greek historian, basically wrote about Babylon's defenses like a teenager describing a video game boss. Everyone on Earth agreed on one thing: this city could not be taken by force. And technically, they were right. It never was. That's the twist. Hold that thought. 'Cause Babylon in 539 BC had a problem no wall can fix. The rot was on the inside, and it came in 3 flavors. Number 1. The king wasn't home. I'm not being poetic. The actual king of Babylon, a man named Nabonidus, had packed up years earlier and moved to an oasis called Tema, deep in the Arabian desert, roughly 700 kilometers from his own capital. Why? Nabonidus was obsessed, and I mean obsessed, with the moon god Sin, not Marduk, the chief god of Babylon, the god the entire city's identity was built around, the moon god. He spent about 10 years out there in the sand doing religious renovations while his empire ran on autopilot. Imagine the CEO of the biggest company in the world just ghosting the office for a decade to work on his hobby project. Yeah, that's gonna be a problem. Number 2. The priests were furious. In Babylon, the priesthood of Marduk wasn't just a church. It was the bank, the bureaucracy, and the deep state all rolled into one. And every year, the king was supposed to come home and personally lead the New Year festival, the Akitu, where he took the hand of Marduk's statue and renewed his right to rule. Nabonidus skipped it, year after year after year.
To the priests, this wasn't rude. This was cosmic sabotage. And these were not people you wanted as enemies, 'cause they controlled the temples, the grain, the money, and, as we're about to see, possibly the gates.
Number 3. The guy left in charge. With dad in the desert, the man running Babylon was the crown prince, Belshazzar. And Belshazzar's greatest documented talent was throwing parties. He was co-regent technically, handling the administration, but he couldn't lead the New Year festival because he wasn't actually the king, so the religious crisis just kept festering. So picture it, an absent king, an enraged priesthood, and a party prince holding the keys to the greatest city on earth. All they needed now was someone to take advantage. Enter that someone. Cyrus the Great. And look, history hands out the title The Great, like participation trophies sometimes. But this man earned it twice over. Cyrus started as the king of a small Persian kingdom that most people considered a backwater vassal of the Medes. Then, around 550 BC, he flipped the script and conquered the Medes, his own overlords, partly because half their army defected to him mid-war. Then he turned west and took on Croesus, the king of Lydia, the richest man alive, the guy whose name literally became the phrase, rich as Croesus. Croesus asked the famous oracle at Delphi if he should attack Cyrus, and the oracle said if he did, a great empire would fall. Croesus attacked. A great empire did fall. Sir, always ask the oracle a follow-up question. By 540 BC, Cyrus ruled everything from the Aegean Sea to the edge of Central Asia, and there was exactly one superpower left standing between him and total domination of the known world: Babylon. And here's the thing about Cyrus that made him genuinely terrifying. He didn't fight like a conqueror. He fought like a recruiter. Everywhere he went, he studied who was unhappy, who felt disrespected, whose god had been insulted, and he made them the offer. Join me. Keep your temples, keep your customs, keep your jobs. He weaponized kindness the way other kings weaponized fire. So when Cyrus looked at Babylon and saw a moon-worshipping absentee king sitting on top of the angriest priesthood in Mesopotamia, he didn't see walls. He saw an open door with extra steps. And what he did next is one of the smoothest operations in military history. But that's nothing compared to what happens on the night itself, because the actual fall of Babylon is so cinematic that people have been retelling it for 25 centuries.
First, the boring part, which was still a catastrophe.
In late September of 539 BC, Cyrus's army met the Babylonian field army at a city called Opis on the Tigris River. Nabonidus, who had finally come home a few years earlier once Cyrus started looking scary, sent out his forces.
The Persians crushed them. The Nabonidus Chronicle, an actual Babylonian clay tablet you can go see in the British Museum, records the defeat, and then something worse. After the battle, the people of the region rebelled against their own king.
On October 10th, the fortress city of Sippar, one of Babylon's main shields, surrendered without a fight. Nabonidus ran. 2 days. It took 2 days for the road to Babylon to be completely open. And inside the capital, behind those unbeatable walls, what was the leadership doing? What was the plan? What was the emergency response? A banquet! They threw a banquet! Oh boy, here we go. The Book of Daniel paints the scene, and even if you read it as literature rather than a court transcript, it captures exactly what the last night of an empire feels like. Belshazzar the king held a great feast for 1,000 of his lords, 1,000 nobles, drinking, feasting, while an undefeated Persian army stood days, maybe hours, from the city. And then Belshazzar did something that made even his own guests nervous. He called for the sacred golden vessels that Nebuchadnezzar had looted from the temple in Jerusalem decades earlier, holy objects from a conquered people's god, and he used them as party cups. He toasted his idols of gold and silver out of them. In the ancient world, this wasn't just tacky. This was spitting in the eye of every god in the region at once, while your kingdom was already on fire. Cool. Cool, cool, cool. So we're doing this then. And that, the story says, is the moment the fingers of a human hand appeared in the lamplight and began to write on the plaster of the palace wall. The party stopped. The Book of Daniel says the king's face went pale, and his knees literally knocked together. Nobody could read the words. So they brought in Daniel, an old Judean exile with a reputation for interpreting the impossible, and he read the message out loud. Mene, mene, tekel, upharsin, numbered, weighed, divided. God has numbered the days of your kingdom and ended it. You have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. That is, hands down, the most brutal performance review in recorded history. And here's the detail that gets me. Belshazzar heard the prophecy, understood it, rewarded Daniel with a purple robe and a gold chain, promoted him to third ruler of the kingdom, and then went right back to the party. He was told to his face that his kingdom would end. He never changed a thing.
That's the thumbnail of this whole story. A man toasting his own funeral.
But here's the crazy part. While the wine was still being poured, the river outside was disappearing. This is the piece of the puzzle that turns a siege into a heist. Babylon's great weakness was hiding in plain sight. The Euphrates River ran directly through the city, entering under the walls on one side and exiting the other. The Babylonians knew this, obviously, which is why the riverbanks inside the city had their own walls and gates. As long as the river ran deep, no army could use it. So, according to Herodotus and the Greek historian Xenophon, Cyrus's engineers simply turned it off. Upstream, they dug channels and diverted the Euphrates into a marshy basin, dropping the water level in the riverbed until, in Herodotus's words, it reached about the middle of a man's thigh deep. The most feared moat in the world, reduced to a puddle you could wade through in sandals. The Persians didn't go over Babylon's walls. They didn't go through them. They walked under them, down the empty riverbed, in the dark, on the night of October 12, 539 BC. And now the two halves of the story click together. 'Cause why were the river gates open? Why did nobody sound the alarm? Herodotus says the city was celebrating a festival, dancing and drinking, exactly matching the Bible's feast. But the Babylonian sources hint at something juicier. The Nabonidus Chronicle says, the army of Cyrus entered Babylon without battle, not after a heroic struggle, without battle. Many historians think the priests of Marduk, or officials aligned with them, simply opened the city from the inside, that the whole river stunt worked, 'cause someone made sure the guards were looking the other way. The general who led the entry, a man named Gobryas, wasn't even Persian. He was a Babylonian governor who had defected to Cyrus. Read that again. The greatest city on earth was entered by its own former official, possibly welcomed by its own priests, while its own prince partied. The walls never mattered. The city wasn't stormed. It was unlocked.
Herodotus adds the detail that haunts me most. Babylon was so enormous that when the outer districts had already fallen, the people in the center of the city didn't know. They kept dancing. The empire had already ended, and the news simply hadn't walked far enough into town yet. Somewhere in that gap, in those few hours between the fall and the finding out, is the entire human condition.
And the book of Daniel closes the feast with one line, like a door slamming. That very night, Belshazzar, king of the Babylonians, was slain. The party prince never saw the sunrise. His father Nabonidus was captured soon after. The empire of Nebuchadnezzar, the empire that had burned Jerusalem and dragged nations into captivity, ended in one night, at dinner. So, here's what I want to know, and I want it in the comments. Who really lost Babylon? Was it Nabonidus, the absentee king who abandoned his capital and insulted its god for 10 years? Was it Belshazzar, the prince who answered an invasion with a wine list? Or was it the priests of Marduk, the insiders who may have handed their own city to a foreign king out of spite? The ghost, the party boy, or the priests? Pick one and defend it. I'll be reading. But wait, there's more, 'cause what Cyrus did after taking Babylon is the part that flipped history. 17 days later, on October 29th, Cyrus himself entered the city. And the sources describe something no one expected from a conqueror. A welcome. Green branches spread before him, crowds celebrating. The city intact. No massacre. No burning. No looting of the temples. Cyrus ordered his soldiers to respect the sanctuaries, kept the Babylonian officials in their jobs, and, in a move of pure political genius, publicly took the hand of Marduk, performing the ritual the actual kings of Babylon had been skipping. He didn't present himself as a foreign invader. He presented himself as the guy Marduk personally recruited to fix the management. We even have the press release. It's called the Cyrus cylinder, a barrel of baked clay covered in cuneiform, sitting in the British Museum right now, in which Cyrus declares that Marduk searched all lands for a righteous king, took him by the hand, and delivered Babylon to him without a fight. Is it propaganda? Absolutely. It's magnificent propaganda. But it's propaganda backed by action, because Cyrus then did something almost unheard of in the ancient world. He let the captives go home. The peoples that Babylon had deported, including the Judean exiles who'd been weeping by its rivers for 2 generations, were allowed to return and rebuild their temples, with imperial support. That single decision is why Cyrus is the only non-Jewish figure in the Hebrew Bible ever called Messiah, an anointed one. The man who conquered the world's greatest city is remembered by its victims as a liberator. And this is the part historians always skip. With Babylon, Cyrus now ruled the largest empire the world had ever seen up to that point, stretching from the Aegean to the edge of India, and he'd taken its crown jewel with the casualty count of a quiet Tuesday.
Compare that to what we watched the Mongols do to Baghdad, on these same rivers, 17 centuries later. Hulagu needed a week of slaughter, and a river black with ink. Cyrus needed a drained river, a furious priesthood, and 1 dinner party. 2 conquests, same land, opposite playbooks.
And it's Cyrus's empire, tolerance as a weapon, that lasted 200 years and became the template Alexander, Rome, and honestly every empire since has been cribbing from.
And that's the part that stays with you. Babylon's walls were real. The chariots really could ride on top of them. Every stone did its job. But walls only defend a city whose people want to defend it. And by 539 BC, nobody inside Babylon was willing to fight for the men in charge. The king was absent, the prince was drunk, the priests were done. The strongest fortress on earth fell to the oldest weakness there is, leadership that stopped paying attention.
We even still use the phrase, when something's obviously doomed and everyone can see it coming, except the people in charge, what do we say? The writing is on the wall. 2,500 years later, that dead man's party is still our warning label. Every doomed company, every collapsing team, every leader scrolling their phone while the building burns, is Belshazzar raising a stolen cup while the river runs dry outside. So one more time, the ghost, the party boy, or the priests? Who really lost Babylon? Drop your verdict in the comments and defend it, 'cause I'll be arguing back. And if you thought a conqueror with a drained river was scary, wait until you meet the one who built towers out of human skulls, beat everyone who ever fought him for 40 straight years, and humiliated an Ottoman sultan so badly the empire nearly died in its crib. The most undefeated warlord in history, and most people can't even pronounce his name. Click this video right here.